Breaking Taboo Podcast with your host, Serena Sun, Season 2, a podcast series centered around all things mental health. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking Taboo Podcast. I'm Serena Sun. I'm here with Dr. Erica Krakovich. This is a sequel basically to our IG Live that we did earlier about couples therapy. And we had one before that about how therapists are humans too. So therapists are just like us. So today in our podcast, we will be talking a little bit more about both of those topics and breaking some myths around therapy and couples therapy. So Erica is a good friend of mine, and she has quite a background in therapy and psychology. So let me just introduce her first. Dr. Erica Krakovich is a licensed clinical psychologist who runs a private practice based out of LA and New York City. Dr. Krakovich holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Washington University in St. Louis, a master's in marriage and family therapy, and a doctorate in applied clinical psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She got her start as a therapist back in 2013, working with UCLA students, and has since expanded into broader practice with young professionals, couples, and adults struggling with depression, anxiety, and complex trauma. Dr. Krakovich has specialized training in psychodynamic, relational, cognitive behavioral, polyvagal, and somatic interventions, as well as sex and couples therapy. She is licensed in over 35 states. How are you, Erica?
Doing well. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. So licensed in over 35 states. I think we touched upon that a little bit in the past IG Live, which we were talking about how every state has different requirements for licensing and how it's like very different than what it used to be now with the advent of telehealth and telemedicine, right? So I'm just curious, just to start it off, like, is there even a reason why we need so many different licenses? Because I was just talking to like a physician about this just a couple nights ago, and even he was saying like it's kind of ridiculous because let's say why do you have to get a different license for New Jersey to practice in like Pennsylvania, or vice versa if it's you're just crossing a bridge, right? So and I was saying maybe there's certain things about the population in a certain state that you need to know about. I'm not quite sure why it is for physicians, but why is it that you have to get licensed in different states for therapists?
Well, each state has their own set of ethics. So I think that's one of the primary reasons, just understanding each state's their board's ethics codes and regulations. I mean, uh, the practice can look different, the rules, regulations, boundaries, and ethics, state to state. But that said, COVID kind of revolutionized the field in that therapists, they loosened the restrictions on state to state practice, interstate practice. And so there's a general realization that, clients, if they're traveling out of state or if they're moving home, they're going to need a continuity of care. So for that reason, there's new committees that are being formed to help kind of facilitate interstate reciprocity.
Yeah, why are there different regulations though, in depending on the states? Why can't we come up? Why is it so difficult, I guess, to come up with a national regulation?
I agree. I think a national board would make more sense. I mean, I took a national exam that applies to all states, including Canada. So if we're required to have the same skill set state to state, why not ethics too? It would be easier for sure, but I guess that's just kind of the setup of our country, that there are certain federal regulations and certain state regulations, and for whatever reason, state regulations for the practice of psychology and therapy are separate. They're kept They're kept as state regulations.
Yeah, because I mean, it makes it hard. Like, let's say, someone has had a therapist for a while that knows all about them, that they're really working on something. And then what if, they move, right? If they move to a different state, they're going to have to find a whole new therapist, even though it's the same person. And, so they have to kind of like almost like start over, right, with a different therapist. And that can be extremely frustrating and basically not good for their healing process, right? Kind of a setback. So I don't understand that. Do you know of any examples of uh, ethical differences across states?
Um, it's a good question. Nothing glaring. I mean, I studied some of them years ago when I got licensed and can't think of one off the top of my mind. I think maybe the parameters around suicidality and who you report to. Maybe there's certain uh, different types of services available state to state that you have to be familiar with. But to be honest, I think that's why there is growing state reciprocity, why I'm a member of SciPact, which allows me to practice in quite a few states, because there is a lot of overlap, and the most important things I think are streamlined across all states.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. And I think the world is changing, or hopefully our country is changing with this, because it just makes sense to be able to practice virtually, right?
Mhm.
And it actually, that's not only in therapy and physician practices, that's also in the world of nonprofit organizations, where there are a lot of fundraising rules around, like, if you fundraise physically over a certain amount, and every state is different. Every single state is different with this, so it gets extremely confusing. But if you go over a certain amount in certain states, like, you have to get registered. Other states, it's like you have to get registered regardless if you're doing anything. Some states, it's like you don't have to get registered in that state. It's very extremely confusing, hard to find all the information on. But now, even with fundraising, where everything's done online, virtually, right? Everything is done through a website, right? It's just is kind of like a very old process that has not caught up with technology yet. And we in the nonprofit fundraising world, we also are trying to make a push. I think this is happening across a lot of different fields, and hopefully the nation's going to get together and have some type of common ground with all of this. Well, I'd like to get a little bit into our world of just therapy in general and couples therapy and all the things that we spoke about. One thing that sticks out, just because it was so recent, we talked about couples therapy. I know that you had some things to say about talking about, like, when you're in couples therapy, the client might feel that the therapist might be taking different sides, right? So I know that's a huge jump from what we were talking about, the licensing, but let's just get straight to it. But yeah, so yeah, it was oftentimes one of the major problems or myths that clients experience when they go to couples therapy is that they think that the therapist is taking one side over the other, and then like one individual in the couple will like get, kind of pissed about that, or just like feel like not connected to the therapist, or feel like, yeah, it's not fair or whatever. And that's a common myth, actually, for why people don't really want to get couples therapy. So what are your thoughts about that as a couples therapist?
If you find a couples therapist that is taking sides, run and find a new couples therapist. I think one way to avoid that is to do consults. I think sometimes, a client will have their individual therapist do the couples therapy, and that's not effective because your individual therapist is by nature already biased towards you. So I would recommend finding a separate couples therapist than who you're seeing individually. There are certain states that have ethics parameters around that too. So there's one difference for you. And then also, I would suggest that a couple do consults with several different couples therapists, kind of share their issues and get an idea of how the couples therapist might work with the dynamic. And that way you can kind of ideally prevent a situation where a couples therapist is taking sides, because that's not effective couples therapy.
Yeah, and then we also spoke about how sometimes the therapist might not be taking sides, but the client might it might come across that way to the client because they might not agree with what the therapist is saying and think that the therapist is just, agreeing with one person over the other. So how do you navigate that as a therapist?
Yeah, I would if I was a couples therapist for a couple and one partner, I felt that I was being pretty fair and one partner felt they were being victimized or teamed up on, I would have them consult their individual therapist. Um, and maybe I would also collaborate with the individual therapist, get a release of information to consult, and maybe that could inform my practice. But also sometimes you just have people that just don't have the most objective experience of reality, so that's something to work on in your individual therapy. But of course, we're imperfect too as therapists, so if um I'm constantly learning and growing how to be less biased and how to be more balanced in how I facilitate couples therapy.
I think a lot of people don't realize that you can have the individual therapist speak with the couples therapist. So, like, how does that work?
So you would just get a release of information, which is a form that the clients both sign. Well, actually, if it's with the individual, no, it would be both because it's a couple. So you would have them both sign a form that allows the therapist to consult with the other therapist. It's very common in our field, because a lot of time we do collaborative care with lots of clinicians on a team, and it's important to have continuity of care, and that's how you do it is through collaboration. So
Yeah, no, that's really great. That's really great that you can have that happen, so that all the therapists get the full picture of what's
mhm.
going on with the client, and therefore, they can better help out the client or clients in this couples therapy example. So I think earlier you said something like, it's always better to have in a situation of couples therapy to do it with like a new therapist and not the individual therapist that has already been with one of the couples for so long, right? Which is, I find interesting because that is one of the things that I do see that happening sometimes. And, I do see that sometimes even with like family therapy, an individual therapist, might say like, okay, like I would like to get your family in a few sessions. I would like to talk to, your parents, or I'd like to talk to your spouse or whatever, right? And that does happen. So I'm just curious, when does that happen? Is that appropriate? When is it appropriate or not?
Question. It's a personal call, I think, by the therapist. If I feel like there's an ongoing family dynamic, I generally refer to family therapy. But if I feel like it's something that can be addressed just by bringing it's for individual therapy, for instance, it's individual therapy. So if I'm having a family member come every week, that becomes family therapy. That's no longer an individual therapy. So there's a distinction where I would say if I think it's a goal that can be accomplished with a couple sessions with a family member, great, bring them to the individual. But if it's something that's more has more depth and maybe might take longer to get to a resolution, I would refer out to a family therapist.
Okay, and not all therapists do, family therapy or couples therapy as well.
No, as far as I know, with all the states, you as a licensed clinician, you're able to practice with families and couples. If you're shopping for a family or couples therapist, I would say look for someone with a specialty in that, because a lot of people just prefer working with individuals and that's what their experience is. And so they're not as well versed in couples work or family work as someone who has a lot of experience and training. I did separate. So my licensure is holistic for psychology in general, but then I went on and did a bunch of additional trainings and got certifications in couples and sex therapy and family therapy. And one of my degrees is couples and family therapy, but you don't need a family therapy license to be able to practice.
Curious, just for fun, what are some of the major challenges that you see that you have to deal with personally in couples therapy or therapy in general?
Major challenges, I would say for individual, someone not taking ownership of their role in being able to change their dynamic and their life. So that would look like somebody coming into therapy and saying, it's the world's fault, it's everyone else's fault, I'm perfect. This is a huge exaggeration, but like I have no issues. It's everyone else's fault. They take no ownership for their role in their life being the way it is. And so therefore, how do you work with a client like that? If they're not willing to do their own work, then there's no work to be done. So that would be a major roadblock to doing effective therapy. That occurs in couples therapy as well, or family therapy, not taking ownership of your part in a dynamic that's dysfunctional. So absolutely, that I think is the biggest hindrance to therapeutic work.
And then how do you typically deal with that?
Um, I name it. I just say, look, like this is what I'm observing. I'm observing that you're thinking it's the world's fault and not yours. And so, unless you're willing to recognize that you have a part and that you have work to do, I can't help you. So
Hmm.
I would refer out. I would you know, I just that's not an effective therapy client. You
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, in the world of coaching, we call that being uncoachable.
there you go.
Unworkable and uncoachable. Yeah. But I think yeah, I also feel like, a lot of clients might get angry hearing that, especially ones that don't want to admit to any responsibility. I can see them getting so angry with a therapist telling them that. Does that
Yeah.
happen?
Oh, of course. I mean, we're trained not to be the nice guys and not to placate clients. We have to challenge them, otherwise it's not effective therapy. So if they get angry, it's a shame. But and of course, there's ways to address this without just being, like attacking a client. We don't ever want to do that. But we have to challenge clients, and if they can't accept gentle challenge, then it's not a good fit.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think that's so tricky too. One of the other tricky things to navigate, even in any relationship in general, right? Because that's the mark of a healthy relationship is like being able to be honest with each other, right? But you also don't want to, as a therapist, like break that trust. Do you have anything that you've learned from experience on better navigating that, or is it
Um,
just dependent on the client?
yeah, you mean the rapport building specifically?
Yeah, the having to balance out the trust and rapport, but
Mhm.
also the fact that you have to be honest and challenge them and tell them things that they might not want to hear.
I would say in the beginning of the work together, when you're just building the relationship, you want to focus more on building the rapport and not challenging so much in the beginning, unless a client's asking for it. You definitely need to build a level of trust before you can start challenging a client. So that's how I would address that. Once you have a trusting working relationship, that's where all the work can begin. So the
Mm.
first step is always build rapport.
And how long can that take?
um, the building rapport varies client to client. It can take a few sessions, it can take one session, it can take a year, it can take several years. It just varies.
Yeah, the time of therapy varies so much for every individual. A big part of that is how long also does it take to build that rapport and trust with the therapist, right? So, again, there's a lot of tricky things to navigate in the world of therapy, and it's hard to pinpoint. It's so different than like punch in these numbers and this is a calculation you get, it's so different from that. So I think that's one of the challenges in the world of therapy in general. On the other side of that, what are the best things about being a therapist, the most rewarding experiences?
How much time do you have?
Oh,
I
wow. That's great.
No, I love being a therapist. It's the best career I ever had. I've had several careers. And it's just the most rewarding experience. I have the gift of working with very high functioning people who are open to the work and able to change. So you see the progress right away. And I mean, I've coached clients for years and seen, where they started and where they've finished or where they are now. And it's just, it's incredible to witness firsthand. It's a gift. So I love that aspect of the work. It gives me purpose in life.
And what does that look like, though? I guess the question is, how do you know when a client is improving in the work?
Of course, it's a lot of self-report. You have to talk about the rapport that we were talking about previously. It's all about trust and being able to trust that the client is being honest and genuinely, like, authentically delivering their experience. That said, I've had clients who came in with pretty serious depression or trauma or anxiety, debilitating to the point where they couldn't work, they couldn't, have a relationship, they couldn't really function in their daily lives. And then to the point where a couple years later, they were able to hold down a job, they were able to have a healthy relationship, they're able to say, wow, I actually know what it feels like to be happy. I know what it feels like to be fulfilled. So these are ways that you can observe progress over time.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so things like being able to hold down a job, being able to have a healthy relationship, basically being more higher functioning in certain aspects of life that are fulfilling, right? Which is what we all want. Everybody want. And honestly, we're all trying to do that. Like even therapists and coaches and CEOs and everyone. Like is that I feel like that's a very common human desire that we're constantly working for because relationships are never easy and working on ourselves is never easy, and no matter what job you have, there's always challenges, right? But of course, we're talking about, more like
Absolutely.
the functioning of it. But you touch on something very interesting. That's probably all we have time for, but I do just want to ask this. We're talking so much about honesty, right? Honesty in the client therapy relationship, honesty with the therapist, building the rapport. There, what if a client is not honest? For some clients, it might take a really long time to build this rapport. I feel like there are quite a few clients who are scared of what the therapist might think of them. Maybe they don't want to face what it is that they know they have to face. So it can be a really long, arduous process of filtering through like how honest a client is being, right? And how do you know? How do you know if a client is lying, right? Do you know? Yeah, so what
Uh,
happens with that?
Yeah, no, sometimes, to be honest, I'm not a lie detector. So sometimes I can tell, but other time, for instance, if a client has a drinking problem and they tell me they drink 5 drinks a day, we're supposed to double that. So I've had clients who, quite honestly, it took years for them to admit something to me that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So that's, to my point about the rapport, right? It can sometimes take years for a client to feel comfortable enough to be honest with a therapist. And that is why the rapport is so important, because you need to be able to trust your therapist. That's why we have confidentiality. We want to be able to trust that we're in a safe space to be able to divulge whatever is happening in our lives or whatever we're ashamed of, and feel held and feel not judged. So ideally, you find a therapist where you feel safe enough to be honest. And if you don't, I would say shop around for a new therapist. But but yeah, you have a point that sometimes it takes people a really long time to even admit to themselves, to be honest with themselves about what their issues are. So just patience is a big aspect of the work too.
What about triangulation in couples therapy? I'm not talking about from the therapist, I'm talking about from a client. Let's say, just for example, a client has like a narcissistic personality disorder or something like that, right? Where there's a lot of triangulation where they're not being fully honest or can't face things in the therapy process, and the therapist might not even know. Have you ever experienced that? Just out of
Oh
curiosity.
yeah, I've had
Oh.
clients come in with two very different stories about what's going on, and it's incredible. It makes it a lot harder to do the work because you're just like, well, I there's two different truths here, and I have no idea who to go with. I imagine the truth is somewhere in the middle. But that's what is important about certain modalities of couples therapy. For instance, EFT, emotionally focused therapy, it takes the whole what the story is or what the facts of the story out of the picture, and it focuses on what are you feeling, how's your partner making you feel, and that hopefully encourages more truth and honesty and authenticity than maybe what's the right version of the story or who did what to whom.
Oh, I really like that. Yeah, I really like that. That's a good also good to practice in I feel like with relationships in general, right? It's not so much about he said, she said, right, and what happened, but more just about how you're feeling.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
how you're making each other feel and being vulnerable with that. Although also with certain diagnoses, the vulnerability aspect also differs too, I think, based on the individual, right? So again, there are a lot of challenges, so many challenges, but what I'm hearing is it's extremely rewarding, and you've seen a lot of progress. And you say, would you say that you see like more progress than not in this field of work?
I would say so, but it depends on the population you work with. If you work with really severe personality disorders, it's much harder to see progress than if you're working with depression, anxiety, trauma, relational issues, things like that. Then if you're working with high functioning clients, it's very easy to see
Hmm.
progress, and it can be really quick. So yeah,
But
I would say,
not, but what about personality disorders? Because those are
yeah.
hard.
Yeah, personality disorders are much harder. Schizophrenia, for instance, I mean, right, pretty severe diagnoses. It's much harder. It's a much slower process. Sometimes you don't, it's just about helping a client live as opposed to really seeing a ton of growth.
And what is that like? Narcissism, borderline, schizophrenia.
Yeah, schizophrenia, psychoses, yeah, I things that I don't work with as much, so I can't really attest to experience as much. Mental illness, autism, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely, Erica. I mean, it's already challenging enough, so I can only imagine, how challenging it is to work with those types of populations specifically. Um, But yeah, I think obviously we'll be doing a lot more podcasts, and we have in the past too spoken with therapists that do specialize in these types of populations and disorders. And it's also very interesting, and there's a whole other set of things to discuss there. So I hope that you tune in more for more conversations. But I think that's all the time that we have for today, because Dr. Erica has more clients to see as of now. So thank you so much for taking the time, Erica, and speaking with us. And it's been a really amazing IG Live, which for those of you out there, you can always check out our Instagram at Breaking Taboo to see our IG Live. And you can also check out Dr. Erica Krakovich's as well. Would you like to tell everyone where they can find you?
Sure. My website is www.drkrakovitz.com. My IG is Dr. Erica Krakovitz, I think. I think it's Dr. Erica Krakovitz. And I have a email. It's dr.krakovitz@gmail. Google me. You'll find me through Breaking Taboo. So I'll get
Yeah.
back to you in more ways to contact me.
Yeah, no, those are plenty of ways. And just Erica doesn't do IG that much. So it's all new.
As you can see from our first IG live.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, a pretty fun process to go through. But you know what? Honestly, like today was so relaxed and comfortable, and so again, like to go to the point of therapists are human, everybody's human, we're all human, we're all here to learn and grow and evolve, and we're all just doing that every day, every single day. And some days are easier and some days are harder than others. And all of us experience that, so we're all human. So, yeah, I guess keep fighting the fight or keep going with the flow or whatever. mantra makes you feel happier, makes you feel more empowered, right? But yeah, with that said, thank you so much, Erica. It's good to
Uh,
see you. Always good to see
Always
you.
good to see you too. I can't wait to do more of these. It's so much fun.
Yeah, they really are. Thank you so much for your insight, Erica. Thank you for tuning in, everyone, and have a good day. Have a good rest of your night.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.